just as a backlog, I have read The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is a book, a very long book. It talks about the history, the origins of the Fed during the foundation and establishment of the United States of America. They've tried to call it a central bank. They failed 2 or 3 times to establish the United States of America's first central bank, because as countries begin, they need a central bank. Okay, so like close to 200 years ago, there used to be banks in the South, banks in the North, and they would use like different currency, like green bills, pink bills. And if you traveled, sometimes banks wouldn't take another bank's certificates, you know, saying that there's gold in the vault down in a southern bank, until somebody actually literally, wagon, horse, or train, went down and collected the gold and brought it back. Sometimes you couldn't even get banked. So there was a need for a centralized financial trust. And so that's what central banks have afforded everybody. However, the whole purpose of the Fed, at least today, in its modern workings, is you have private banks that are allowed to interact with the Fed, and they're the middleman between the Fed and the Treasury. So now, with the Treasury says, hey, we got IRS, we have an income, which is our IRS, our tax collections, and they need to loan money. The Fed will print it up, they'll create a bond, it'll be issued, and these private banks will act as a middleman between the Fed and the Treasury. And your IRS taxes go to pay off those printed, lent out Federal Reserve notes. So it's essentially burning a currency. It's kind of interesting. It's just like the crypto stuff, where in order to keep the value of something, you do have to burn it and get rid of it. And that's what tax collection basically is it's a burning mechanism to get rid of the dollars, because they're printed. They really don't have any intrinsic value, especially if they didn't force people to collect them and pay off taxes and essentially burn them, like burning a token. Anyways, the history and origin of the Fed is very interesting. And what has naturally occurred over time, they do print money and then loan it into existence, where other banks can now, their accounts are credited, and now they can begin loaning out as well. When you deal with credit bubbles, that's all the Fed really does, is they create credit bubbles. They print up a bunch of money. They don't even print it. They just digit ones and zeros into an account. And then other banks are able to lend out credit, or debt-based fiat currency to lend out credit, in order to pump up the next debt credit bubble, which they happen every 10 years or so. As long as there's confidence in the lending. See, when somebody lends you $100 and says, hey, you only need to pay back 90, you should be suspicious. And that's what going negative interest rates does, is it rises their suspicion. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are the biggest lenders for mortgages. They are an extension of the Fed, more or less. And so when mortgages go bust because they're held by private investors, people like you and me, but with lots of money because they've figured out how to play the game, when they go bust and they need to sell those mortgages and just take the loss, they sell it to the last person buying it. And that's the Fannie Mae and the Freddie Macs. And that's basically the Fed. The Fed is basically owning your home. And by the end game is they will own every home. They will own every stock. They will own every bond. They will basically outbid and outprice everybody out of everything, because they have an unlimited supply of it. It's really not a scarce asset at all. So the only thing you can do is get out of debt, and then, play in the system, but do not be leveraged, because that's the biggest thing. With these credit and debt cycles that the Fed is creating, they're constantly enslaving people through debt, because you still need dollars to pay off the dollars. And when the credit tightens up and your job quits paying you, and you still need dollars, like you might want gold, but you need dollars. You might want Bitcoin, but you need dollars. Okay, so when push comes to shove, everybody still needs dollars, and if the person where the dollars originate from isn't handing them out anymore, everybody's squeezing trying to get dollars. And so that's kind of the purpose of the Fed. That's what they do. And by the end game, they'll own houses, bonds, stocks, everything. And just keep in mind that the Fed is a group of banks like the Rothschilds and stuff, that are private. So, some people speculate it is like some families in the UK that are the first people to really establish wealth in the US. Yeah, it is what it is, but if you don't know much about it, that's kind of a pretty good brief overview, to be honest with you. I've read a lot about it, and it's a peak interest. All right, cheer up.